She was beaten for feeding an Indian, but that same warrior carried her to his village. The Arizona sun beat mercilessly against the cracked earth as Sarah Mitchell crept through the mesquite brush, her worn calico dress catching on thorns with each careful step. In her trembling hands, she carried a clay bowl filled with cool water and strips of dried beef, precious provisions stolen from her father's pantry while he conducted business in town. 3 days had passed since she'd first discovered the wounded man hidden in the rocky outcropping near Willow Creek, an Apache warrior, his bronze skin marked by a deep gash across his shoulder where a cavalry bullet had found its mark. Sarah knew she should have run, should have alerted her father and the other ranchers immediately. Instead, something in the man's dark eyes, pain, yes, but also a fierce dignity that reminded her of a wounded eagle, had compelled her to help. The warrior, who she'd learned was called Dakota, watched her approach with the same wariness he'd shown on that first day. His long black hair was braided with leather strips, and despite his injury, he held himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Sarah had grown up hearing stories of Apache savagery, of raids and massacres, but this man had never once threatened her. When she'd first offered him water, he'd studied her face for a long moment before accepting it with a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Your wound is healing well," Sarah whispered in the broken Spanish she'd learned from the Mexican workers on their ranch. Dakota understood more English than he let on, she suspected, but their communication remained a careful dance of gestures and simple words. As she knelt beside him to change the makeshift bandage she'd fashioned from torn petticoats, Sarah noticed how his muscles tensed at her proximity. Not from fear, but from something else entirely, an awareness that made her cheeks flush with unexpected warmth. At 19, Sarah had received proposals from 3 different ranchers' sons, but none had ever made her pulse quicken the way this stranger's intense gaze did. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," her father's voice, sharp with fury, cut through the morning air like a whip crack. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she spun around to see Jeremiah Mitchell striding toward them, his weathered face twisted with rage and his rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands. Behind him came 2 of his ranch hands, their expressions grim. "Papa, please," Sarah began, scrambling to her feet, but her father's backhand sent her sprawling into the dust before she could finish the sentence. 3 days, Jeremiah roared, his gray beard quivering with indignation. 3 days you've been sneaking out here feeding this savage while good Christian folk are being murdered in their beds? Dakota had risen to his feet despite his injury, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. But Sarah saw the calculation in his eyes. 1 wounded man against 3 armed whites. Even a warrior's pride had its limits. "He was hurt, Papa," Sarah gasped, blood trickling from her split lip. "I couldn't just let him die. That's exactly what you should have done." Jeremiah's boot connected with her ribs, doubling her over. "These animals don't deserve mercy. They're devils, every last one of them." Through the haze of pain, Sarah saw Dakota take a step forward, his jaw clenched with barely restrained fury. Their eyes met for a moment, his filled with something she couldn't quite identify. Regret? Guilt? Before she could decipher his expression, her father grabbed a handful of her auburn hair and yanked her upright. "You want to play nursemaid to savages?" Jeremiah snarled, drawing his belt from his waist. "Then you'll learn what happens to traitors in this family." The leather cracked against Sarah's back again and again, each blow driving her to her knees. She bit her tongue to keep from crying out, refusing to give her father the satisfaction. But when she glimpsed Dakota's face, saw the warrior's hands clenched into fists, his whole body coiled like a spring, she whispered through gritted teeth, "Don't. Please." It was unclear whether she was pleading with her father to stop or begging the Apache not to intervene. Either way, Dakota remained motionless, though something fundamental shifted in his expression as he watched her suffer for the kindness she'd shown him. When Jeremiah finally exhausted his rage, Sarah lay crumpled in the dirt, her dress torn and bloodied. "Get up," her father commanded coldly. "We're going home, and if I catch you anywhere near this savage again, I'll finish what I started." As the 3 white men turned to leave, confident that the lone Apache posed no threat, Sarah struggled to raise her head. Through swollen eyes, she looked one last time at Dakota. The warrior stood perfectly still, but his gaze never left her face. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended the barriers of language and culture. Later, Sarah would remember the look in his eyes and realize it wasn't goodbye. The moon hung like a silver coin in the star-scattered Arizona sky as Sarah lay on her narrow bed, every breath sending fire through her bruised ribs. Her father had locked her in her room after dragging her home, declaring she would stay there until she came to her senses about the natural order of things. The wooden walls of their ranch house creaked in the desert wind, a lonely sound that matched the ache in her chest. 3 floors below, she could hear her father's voice mixing with those of neighboring ranchers who'd come for an emergency meeting. Words like uprising and military patrol drifted up through the floorboards along with the clink of whiskey glasses and the scrape of boots on worn wood. They were planning something. Sarah was certain of it. She pressed her face against the cool glass of her bedroom window, staring out at the vast darkness beyond. Somewhere out there, Dakota was alone and wounded, probably moving deeper into Apache territory to avoid the inevitable manhunt. The thought made her stomach clench with worry. Had she made his situation worse by helping him? Would her father's rage now extend to an entire people because of her actions? A soft sound from outside made her freeze. Not the usual night chorus of coyotes and owls, but something else. Deliberate and careful. Sarah held her breath, straining to listen. Then she saw him. Dakota moved like liquid shadow across the moonlit yard, somehow avoiding the patches of light that would expose him to any wakeful eyes in the house. Even with his wounded shoulder, he displayed a grace that spoke of years surviving in hostile territory. Sarah's heart hammered against her sore ribs as she watched him approach the gnarled oak tree that grew beside her window. Within moments, he had scaled the trunk with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd learned to climb before he could properly walk. His face appeared outside her second-story window, and Sarah fumbled with the wooden latch, her hand shaking from more than just the desert chill. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered urgently as the window slid open. "My father, the other men, they're all downstairs." Dakota's eyes swept over her face, taking in the purple bruises around her left eye and the split in her lower lip. When he spoke, his English was clearer than she'd expected, touched with only the slightest accent. "I watched them hurt you," he said quietly, "because of kindness you showed to me. That wasn't your fault." Sarah's voice caught. "I made my own choice, as I make mine now." Before she could ask what he meant, Dakota had slipped through the window with surprising silence for such a large man. In the dim light of her oil lamp, Sarah could see the grim determination etched in the lines of his face. "You cannot stay here." "What do you mean?" But even as she asked, Sarah understood. The way her father had looked at her today, not just angry but disgusted, as if she'd become something unclean in his eyes. The whispered conversations between him and her stepmother Martha. The key turning in her bedroom door lock. "They will not forgive this," Dakota continued, moving carefully around her small room. His gaze lingered on the simple furnishings. The cross-stitched sampler reading, "Faith, Hope, Charity," that her mother had made before consumption took her. The daguerreotype of Sarah in her confirmation dress. The well-worn Bible on her nightstand. "Your people, they see me as animal. You as traitor." From downstairs came the sudden scrape of chairs and a chorus of gruff voices. The meeting was breaking up. Sarah's blood turned cold as she heard her father's voice rise above the others. "We'll search every canyon and water hole until we find that Apache. And when we do, we'll make an example that'll keep the rest of his kind away from decent folks." "They're going to hunt you," Sarah breathed. Dakota nodded grimly. "With dogs, with many guns." At sunrise, he turned to face her fully, and Sarah saw something she hadn't expected in his dark eyes. Uncertainty. "I cannot leave you here to face their anger alone. You have to go. Get back to your people where you'll be safe. You showed mercy when you could have chosen hatred." Dakota's voice was soft but resolute. "Honor demands I do the same." The sound of heavy boots on the stairs froze them both. Sarah's father was coming up, probably to check on her before retiring for the night. Dakota moved to the window, but instead of climbing out, he turned back to Sarah with an expression that made her breath catch. "Trust me," he said simply. Before Sarah could respond, before she could even process what was happening, Dakota had swept her up in his arms. The sudden movement sent pain shooting through her injured ribs, but his hold was gentle despite its strength. In one fluid motion, he carried her to the window. "My father!" Sarah started to protest. "Will believe you were taken against your will," Dakota replied. "Better that than to know his daughter chose to leave with an Apache." The footsteps had reached the top of the stairs. A key rattled in the lock. Sarah looked into Dakota's eyes and saw not the savage her father had described, but a man driven by a code of honor as rigid as any Christian commandment. He was offering her a choice: stay and face whatever punishment her father deemed fit, or trust herself to someone she barely knew. The door handle turned. Sarah wrapped her arms around Dakota's neck. Without hesitation, the Apache warrior stepped onto the oak tree's sturdy branch and began their descent into the star-filled darkness, carrying the rancher's daughter away from everything she'd ever known and toward a destiny neither of them could imagine. Behind them, Jeremiah Mitchell's bellow of rage split the night air. But by then they had already disappeared into the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory, where the rules of civilization held no sway, and survival depended on trusting the person beside you. The desert dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and rose as Dakota finally allowed their stolen horse to rest beside a hidden spring deep in the Dragoon Mountains. Sarah slid from the animal's back with trembling legs, her body aching from hours of hard riding through treacherous terrain in the darkness. Every muscle screamed in protest, but the pain was nothing compared to the magnitude of what she'd done. She was no longer Sarah Mitchell, rancher's daughter. In the span of one night, she'd become something else entirely, a woman without a world to call home. Dakota moved with practiced efficiency despite his shoulder wound, hobbling the horse and scanning the rocky ridges for any sign of pursuit. The morning light revealed details Sarah hadn't noticed in the darkness: the intricate beadwork on his leather vest, the silver band around his upper arm, the way his long hair caught the early sunlight like polished obsidian. "Your father's men will not find this place easily," he said, settling beside the spring. "But they will not stop looking." Sarah knelt by the water's edge, cupping the cool liquid in her palms to drink. Her reflection stared back at her, wild auburn hair escaping its braid, dirt-streaked face marked by purple bruises, gray eyes wide with exhaustion and uncertainty. She looked like a stranger to herself. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Dakota was silent for a long moment, his dark gaze fixed on the horizon where dust devils danced in the distance. "My people will not welcome a white woman," he finally admitted. "There has been too much blood between our peoples." Sarah thought of the stories she'd grown up hearing: Apache raids on settlements, cavalry attacks on villages, an endless cycle of violence and revenge that stretched back decades. She was a living symbol of everything his people had learned to hate and fear. "But you have nowhere else to go," Dakota continued. "And He paused, as if struggling with words in a language that wasn't his own. "I cannot abandon someone who showed kindness when others would have shown cruelty." "Why did you really come for me last night?" Sarah asked. "You could have escaped on your own. Would have been safer." Dakota turned to study her face, and Sarah felt that familiar flutter in her chest under his intense scrutiny. "In my language there is a word, goju. It means beauty, but not just of the face or body. Beauty of the spirit. When you brought me water, when you tended my wound despite the danger," he gestured toward her bruised face, "you paid a price for your goju. Honor demanded I pay one in return." The sound of distant gunshots echoed off the canyon walls, and both of them tensed. The search parties had begun. "We must move," Dakota said, rising to his feet. "There is a village, my grandmother's people. The old woman, Ayana, she knew your grandmother." "My grandmother?" Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Long ago, before the soldiers came, before the hatred grew so deep, your grandmother traded with the Apache, fair trades, honest dealings. Ayana remembers this." Dakota helped Sarah to her feet, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle. "It may be enough to buy you sanctuary, at least until we can find another way." They rode deeper into Apache territory throughout the morning, following ancient trails that seemed invisible to Sarah's untrained eye. Dakota navigated by reading signs she couldn't fathom: the bend of certain grasses, the pattern of shadows on rock faces, the flight paths of birds overhead. This was his world, as foreign to her as the drawing rooms of Boston society would be to him. As the sun climbed higher, they encountered their first Apache scouts. 3 warriors emerged from concealment among the rocks as if they'd materialized from the stone itself. Their painted faces were stern, their weapons ready. A rapid exchange in Apache followed, too fast for Sarah to catch even a word. She heard her own name mentioned, saw gestures toward her that ranged from curious to openly hostile. The leader of the scouts, a man with gray streaking his black hair and scars crisscrossing his chest, spoke in accented English. "You bring the white woman to our village? This is foolishness, Dakota." "The woman saved my life, Nalnish," Dakota replied firmly. "She bears her grandmother's face, the one who traded fairly with Ayana's husband before the wars began." Nalnish's eyes narrowed as he studied Sarah's features. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "I see it now. The same eyes, the same chin. But that was a different time. The people will not forget what her kind has done to ours." "Then we must remind them that not all whites are the same," Dakota said. "Just as not all Apache are the same." The scouts led them the final miles to the village, a collection of wickiups nestled in a hidden valley, where a stream provided precious water and towering cliff walls offered protection from cavalry patrols. As they approached, Sarah felt dozens of eyes upon her, women pausing in their work to stare, children peeking out from behind their mothers' skirts, warriors touching their weapons reflexively. The silence was deafening. An ancient woman emerged from the largest wickiup, her face mapped with wrinkles that spoke of nearly 8 decades of desert life. Her hair, white as winter clouds, was braided with turquoise beads, and her dark eyes held a sharpness that age had not dimmed. This could only be Ayana. The old woman approached Sarah slowly, studying her face with the intensity of someone reading a sacred text. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You have your grandmother's eyes," Ayana said in clear English. "Elizabeth McKenna. She came to trade with my husband when I was young. Honest woman, fair woman." The old Apache woman reached out to touch Sarah's bruised cheek gently. "But you are not her, and these are not those times." "No, grandmother," Sarah replied, using the respectful term she'd heard Dakota employ. "They are not." Ayana's weathered face softened slightly at the courtesy. "You have brought trouble to my grandson, and now he has brought that trouble to us." Around them, the village waited in tense silence. Sarah could feel the weight of their collective judgment, the knowledge that her presence here violated every rule both cultures lived by. She was a white woman in an Apache stronghold, protected only by an old woman's memories and a warrior's sense of honor. "I know," Sarah said quietly, "but I had nowhere else to go." Ayana nodded slowly, then turned to address the gathered villagers in rapid Apache. Sarah caught only a few words, but she understood the tone. This was a woman laying down the law to her people. When she finished, the old woman looked back at Sarah with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "You may stay," Ayana announced, "but you will earn your place here, as everyone must. And if trouble comes because of you..." She left the threat unfinished. As the crowd slowly dispersed, some with obvious reluctance, Sarah felt Dakota's presence beside her like an anchor in a storm. She had survived the first test, but she knew it was only the beginning. In this hidden valley caught between the world she'd left behind and one that might never fully accept her, Sarah Mitchell would have to discover who she truly was beneath the roles others had assigned her, and whether love could truly bridge the chasm between two peoples at war. 6 months had passed since Sarah's arrival in the hidden valley, and the Apache village had become something she'd never expected. Home. Her hands, once soft from a life of privilege, now bore the calluses of honest work. She had learned to weave baskets from willow branches, to prepare traditional foods, and to speak enough Apache to communicate with the children who had gradually overcome their fear of her pale skin and strange eyes. But it was Dakota who had truly changed her world. What had begun as gratitude had slowly transformed into something deeper. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, he would teach her the names of stars in his language, while she shared stories of the books she'd read in her father's library. Their conversations had grown from halting exchanges to intimate discussions about dreams, fears, and the possibility of a future neither had dared imagine. The morning air carried the scent of piñon smoke and autumn's approach as Sarah ground corn outside Ayana's wickiup. Her Apache grandmother, as she'd come to think of the old woman, watched with approval as Sarah's technique had improved over the months. "You have learned well," Ayana observed, her weathered hands working expertly on a basket. "But there are still things you must understand about our ways." Before Sarah could ask what she meant, a commotion arose from the village's edge. Riders were approaching, Apache scouts returning from patrol. But something was wrong. The urgency in their movements, the way they gestured toward the trail behind them, sent a chill through Sarah's heart. Dakota emerged from his wiki-up, his face immediately grave as he spoke with the lead scout. Sarah couldn't follow the rapid Apache, but she caught one word that made her blood freeze. Soldiers. What is it? Sarah asked as Dakota approached, his expression grim. A cavalry patrol 2 days behind us. They carry a white flag and request parley. His dark eyes met hers. They also carry a photograph of a woman with auburn hair. Sarah's grinding stone slipped from nerveless fingers. After 6 months, her father had found her. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and tension. The village warriors painted their faces and checked their weapons while the women and children prepared to evacuate to higher ground if negotiations failed. Sarah found herself caught in the center of it all, no longer quite white in the eyes of the approaching soldiers, but not yet fully Apache in the minds of some villagers who viewed her presence as the source of their current danger. When the cavalry finally arrived, Sarah recognized the officer leading them immediately. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison had been a friend of her father's, a career soldier who'd spent a decade fighting Apache in the Arizona Territory. His weathered face showed no surprise when he saw her standing beside Dakota, though his blue eyes hardened with something like disappointment. "Miss Mitchell," Harrison said formally, dismounting but keeping his hand near his sidearm. "Your father has been searching for you. He's offered a substantial reward for your safe return." "I wasn't taken against my will," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I chose to leave." "With an Apache warrior?" Harrison's tone carried decades of prejudice. "Miss Mitchell, you've clearly been through an ordeal. These people have ways of influencing captives, making them believe things that aren't true." Dakota stepped forward, his stance protective but not threatening. "The woman speaks truth. She came willingly." "I don't recall asking for your input, savage," Harrison snapped. Several of his soldiers shifted nervously, hands moving toward their rifles. The Apache warriors responded in kind, the tension ratcheting higher with each passing second. "Enough." Ayana's voice cut through the hostility like a blade. The ancient woman stepped between the two groups, her presence commanding respect from both sides. "You come under white flag. You will honor that or face the consequences." Harrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "We came to retrieve Miss Mitchell and return her to her family. Nothing more." "And if she chooses not to go?" Dakota asked. "Then she's been compromised by her captivity and can't make rational decisions," Harrison replied coldly. "Either way, she's coming with us." Sarah felt the weight of every eye upon her, Apache and cavalry alike. This was the moment she'd dreaded and somehow always known would come. The choice between two worlds, two peoples, two completely different futures. But as she looked at Dakota, saw the love and concern in his dark eyes, she realized the choice had already been made months ago in her father's house, when she'd first chosen compassion over prejudice. "Colonel Harrison," Sarah said, stepping forward, "please give my father a message. Tell him that his daughter died the night he beat her for showing mercy to another human being. What stands before you now is something he never allowed me to be, a woman who chooses her own path." Harrison's face darkened. "Miss Mitchell, you're coming with us, willing or not." The colonel's hand dropped to his pistol, but before he could draw it, a dozen Apache arrows were nocked and aimed at his heart. The cavalry soldiers raised their rifles in response, and for a heartbeat, Sarah thought she was about to witness a massacre. Then Ayana spoke, her voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of leadership. "There is another way," the old woman announced. "An old way from before the hatred consumed both our peoples." She turned to address both groups, switching fluidly between English and Apache so all could understand. "In the time of my grandmother's grandmother, when disputes arose between Apache and white traders, we had a custom, trial by choice. The one in question proves their heart's desire through action, not words." Harrison frowned. "What kind of action?" Ayana smiled, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the steel that had made this woman a leader among warriors. "The white woman will run. Apache and cavalry will pursue together. If she reaches the sacred spring at the valley's heart before being caught, her choice is honored by both peoples. If not," the old woman shrugged, "then the spirits have decided her fate." It was a test that satisfied both cultures' concepts of honor, the Apache belief in letting the spirits guide outcomes, and the cavalry's faith in might making right. Sarah would have to prove her commitment not with words, but with her willingness to risk everything. "And if she reaches this spring?" Harrison asked suspiciously. "Then she has chosen," Ayanna replied firmly. "And you will honor that choice, as will we." Sarah looked at Dakota, saw the love and fear warring in his expression. The sacred spring was 3 miles through treacherous mountain terrain, a grueling test even for someone raised in this land. "I accept," Sarah said before anyone could object. What followed was unlike any chase in the history of either culture. Sarah ran with everything she had, her heart pounding not just from exertion, but from the knowledge that her entire future hung on reaching that spring. Behind her came Apache warriors and cavalry soldiers, their temporary alliance born of shared respect for the trial's ancient rules. Through arroyos and over rocky ridges Sarah climbed, her lungs burning in the thin mountain air. More than once she stumbled. More than once she heard the sound of pursuit growing closer. But each time she thought of Dakota's face, of the life they could build together if she proved strong enough to claim it. When she finally collapsed beside the sacred spring, gasping and bleeding from a dozen scrapes, the first face she saw was Dakota's. He had won the right to reach her first, though whether through speed or the other pursuer's unspoken acknowledgement of his claim, Sarah would never know. "You did it," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "You chose." Colonel Harrison arrived moments later, his face grim but resigned. "The trial is complete," he admitted grudgingly. "Your choice is made, Miss Mitchell." 6 months later, Sarah stood beside Dakota as Ayanna performed the Apache marriage ceremony that would unite them as husband and wife. She wore traditional Apache dress, her auburn hair braided with turquoise beads that had belonged to Dakota's grandmother. Her father would never forgive her choice, she knew. But she had found something more valuable than his approval. She had found herself. As the ceremony concluded and the village celebrated around them, Sarah realized that sometimes the greatest bridges aren't built between peoples or cultures, but between hearts. Love, she had learned, was indeed strong enough to span any divide, but only if both people were brave enough to meet each other halfway. In the hidden valley where Apache and white woman had found common ground, Sarah Mitchell had become something entirely new. Not white, not Apache, but something that belonged to both worlds and neither. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and in Dakota's arms as the desert stars blazed overhead, she was finally, completely home. What did you think of Sarah and Dakota's incredible journey from strangers to soulmates? Their story proves that love truly knows no boundaries when two hearts are brave enough to choose compassion over prejudice. Did this tale of courage and forbidden romance in the Old West touch your heart the way it touched mine? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which moment moved you the most? And if you enjoyed this epic love story that bridges two worlds, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unforgettable tales of love, courage, and the human spirit. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more amazing stories like this one. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love to overcome any obstacle.